Welcome to today's art lesson. Today we're going to be learning how to draw with a pen and creating our own linear artwork. In today's lesson I want us to all master how to draw with a pen. So by the end of today's lesson we're going to understand how to control the pen by using different pressures and mark making techniques. And these different techniques are going to give us a tonal and textural effect that we desire. So we're really going to experiment with a pen and how to use it to get the outcome we want. And then once we've experimented with these techniques, we're going to put them into practice by creating our own linear piece of artwork. Now, when you think of art equipment, a pen might not be the first thing that jumps into your mind, but there can be loads of advantages of drawing with a pen. So let's go through some of them. First off, you can't erase pen. So you will make mistakes, but that's part of the process. And once you remove that fear of making mistakes, you are going to become more confident and free-handed artists. It's going to be vital for our work. Secondly, pen helps us master techniques, so ink is permanent. That means we may need to make every pen stroke count, and we can do this by mastering our mark making and shading techniques, which is what we will do in today's lesson. Then with pen, we can create strong areas of contrast. And once you master the pressure and the movement techniques, we are going to be able to create a whole range of tones in our work, and it's going to make really dramatic effects for us. And lastly, pens are cheap. You're all going to have a pen in your house, and it's really amazing what you can create with just a normal ballpoint pen. So we're going to have fun exploring all these factors in today's lesson. Today's lesson is going to be set out a little bit differently than our previous lessons. So I'm just going to explain the structure for today's lesson during this slide. Make sure you know what to expect. So unlike the other lessons, I want us to draw while the video is playing. So use this slide here, and you can pause it now if you want, but I just want you to make sure you've got everything ready to make sure you can draw while the video is playing. So make sure you got a blank A4 piece of paper. Any spare bits as well might help, just in case you need a few more pieces. And then the most important thing, a pen. Now you can have one pen, two pens, different colour pens. Just get a selection of pens, or just one pen will work. As long, I just want you to make sure it works and it draws quite nicely and got a smooth sort of effect to it. And then lastly, make sure you've got a nice area to work in, because you're going to need to concentrate throughout the video. Our first two drawing tasks in today's lesson are focusing on pen control. These are ideal tasks to start with because they're going to let us get the feel of our pen, and through these tasks we're going to learn how to control the pen and how to move it. So I've included a video here to introduce line weight to you. So watch the video through, and then we're going to follow up with a short drawing task.
So a really good exercise is to draw about 3 distinct groups of lines. Actually, if you find that too challenging, 2 groups are fine as well. But the idea is to create lines that are restricted to being thin in one group and really thick in another. And the key is to keep them consistently thick or consistently thin. It doesn't really matter what you draw, actually. Even if they're just hatch marks or cross hatching or scribbles for that matter, it's just a matter of trying to control the amount of pressure you put on the pen and make your lines consistent. Next is to vary weight along a single line. So along one line, you will vary from thick to thin and vice versa. So you can start with straight lines and then eventually curves, and then you can combine them and gradually make your curves a little bit more complex. Lastly, you should practice applying them to
I want us to experiment with our own line weights in our first drawing task. Now I'm going to put a minute timer on the screen in just a second, and during that minute I'd like us to recreate what was just shown on the video. So 1, I want you to draw 3 distinct groups of lines, starting heavy and bold lines, then a mid-range, and then I want you to apply low pressure on the last group to create thin lines. And then secondly, I'd like you to draw a group of lines that vary in weight along the same line, just as in the video then. So for this drawing task, I want you to keep all the lines consistent in weight by applying the same pressure for each group of lines. Before you get started on the drawing task, make sure your pen is clean first by dabbing or scribbling on a spare bit of paper. That's just going to help you unblock the pen. Now that you've experimented with the pressure you apply when drawing with a pen, I want us to now look at the movements we use when drawing with the pen. So this next drawing task focuses on shading. So similar format as the previous slide. Pay close attention to this little demonstration video now, and then you're going to have your own timed drawing tasks to follow.
All right. Now this is the cool thing. So say for example, I have some strokes like this. All right. Now this is really cool that you can do with a ballpoint pen. You can actually create similar motion as you do with a pencil. See, by using hash marks and create an even gradation in tone. Or you can use circular marks. Point is, you're not seeing lines necessarily. You're seeing even tone. A ballpoint pen is perhaps the only ink drawing instrument, one of the only ink drawing instruments that actually can somewhat or most closely imitate that effect. So now I'm basically blending the lines or treating it just like it's a pencil. Something that I usually do too that is pretty useful is that I kind of like extend my my fingers away from the tip like this, and then it forces the pen to actually glide on the side and really create really light values, because it's basically just gliding over the surface of the paper, and those light marks enables me to create really subtle gradations in value.
For this next drawing task, I'm going to give you 4 minutes. And in the first half, I'd like you to create a 3D shape, and you can do this by using bold lines for the shadow and then thinner lines for the mid-tones. Remember the pressure you apply to create these lines. And then in the second part of this drawing task, I'd then like you to use the pen as you would a pencil. So think about how you hold it. Place your hand halfway up the pen and hold it at an angle and move the pen back and forth, creating a shading technique. You should now be a bit more familiar with your pen and how to handle it after those two tasks. So I'm now going to introduce mark making with you. Now we're going to have 4 short drawing tasks to introduce a few different techniques. We're going to look at hatching, cross hatching, random lines and stippling. Our first mark making technique is hatching, and to hatch you essentially create a series of horizontal parallel lines. Now the closer together you draw your lines, the more dense the shading effect they will create. The further apart they are, the lighter the shading effect will appear. And this technique is best used to create areas with medium shadow. Watch this short demonstration on hatching, and then I'm going to give you a 2-minute timer directly after the video, and I'd like you in that 2 minutes to just draw a circle and practice your own hatching technique.
One individually, starting with hatching. For each one of these techniques, we're going to draw a sphere. Because a sphere is a rounded 3-dimensional form, it'll allow us to create gradations or slow changes in value from dark to light. With hatching, we're going to create uniform lines. Generally, these lines go in the same direction, although sometimes these lines can change direction and follow the cross contours of the object that's being drawn. In this case, we're just going to create horizontal lines. For any subject that you draw, you should always consider the light source. In this case, the light source is originating from the upper left-hand side. This means the value will be darker on the lower right portion of the sphere. To make the value appear darker, we'll add more horizontal lines. By placing lines in between the original lines that we drew, the value is perceived as being darker. The white space of the paper will play an important role. Balancing the amount of black lines and the white paper that is allowed to show through will allow us to create grays. So to review, for hatching, the lines flow in a unified direction. The lines generally do not cross over each other, and the value is adjusted.
Our second technique we're going to practice is cross hatching. So to start, you'll need to create the same hatched lines as before. And once you're done, you then create another layer of hatched lines that overlap your existing work. And now for cross-hatching, the more layers that you add in different angles, or the denser your shading will become. And you can use cross-hatching for creating areas of deep shadows while also creating texture. This is your mark making task number 2, cross-hatching. Same again, I'd like you to watch the video and then I'm going to jump straight in and give you 2 minutes to recreate your own.
Of lines. The next technique we'll talk about is cross-hatching. Here again, we'll use cross-hatching to determine the form and the illusion of the light source in the image. Cross-hatching will begin just as hatching did by creating horizontal lines. Just like with cross-hatching, these lines do not have to be horizontal or vertical or even diagonal. They may flow over the cross contours of the object. Next, we'll create additional lines over the top of the horizontal lines. The greater the frequency of lines that are added, the darker the value becomes. Here again, our light source is originating from the upper left-hand corner. This means the lower right portion of the sphere will be darker in value. This means that more lines will be created in these areas, and there will be a greater frequency of crossing over. With each layer of lines that are added to the drawing, the direction changes. We'll continue the cross-hatching pattern in the cast shadow underneath the sphere. Vertical lines are created, and these are followed by additional applications of lines. Again, the greater the frequency of lines, the darker the perceived value. So to review cross-hatching, lines cross over each other, and the greater frequency of lines produces darker values.
We're halfway through our mark making technique tasks now, and next we're going to be looking at stippling. So stippling is one of the more time consuming ones, and it relies on carefully placed dots to give the impression of shadow and depth. Now the more densely concentrated your dots, the deeper the shadow will be. And during this task I want you to remember the pressure you're using while using the pen, because the smaller dots require a less pressure, and in areas where there's very little shadow needed, you only need a few randomly placed dots. So I'm going to give you the same structure as the last ones. I'll jump straight in and show you the video, and then you'll have 2 minutes to complete your own version.
The value. The fourth technique we'll discuss is called stippling. Stippling occurs when small countless dots are added to a drawing in order to create the value range. The closer the dots are made to each other, the darker the perceived value. Just like the other three examples, we'll consider the light source. And here again, in this fourth example, the light is originating from the upper left-hand side. This means the value will be darker in the lower right portion of the sphere. To create this illusion, we'll add more dots with a greater frequency of dots in the lower right-hand portion of the sphere. The closer these dots are to one another, the darker the perceived value. Of the four techniques, stippling definitely takes the longest amount of time to accomplish. However, it gives the artist the greatest control over the range of value. Slow gradations or changes in value are easily accomplished using this technique. So to review stippling, small dots are used to create the illusion of value. The greater the frequency of dots, the darker the value. No matter what
This is the last task for the mark making techniques, and I've left the hardest for last. So we're going to look at random lines now. Now random lines is the most challenging one, but you've just got to be a bit freer with the way you move the pen. The random lines can be made up of one unbroken or longer weaving and overlapping lines. The lines can be unpredictable, so there's no one set method to doing this. You can just create your own sort of method with it. So for this drawing task, I want you to be a bit creative and just let loose a little bit with that pen. So on the next slide, a similar thing, I'll show you a video and jump straight into the 2-minute timer for the drawing task.
The third technique we'll talk about is using random lines or squiggly lines. Here again, we'll consider the light source, which is originating from the upper left-hand corner. This means the value will be darker in the bottom right portion of the sphere. With random lines, we'll be very loose with our marks. We can create lines that go in various directions, random directions. The greater the frequency that these lines cross over each other, the darker the perceived value. This is a great technique for creating the illusion of texture. Of the four techniques, using random lines is definitely the quickest way to build up value in a drawing. Here again, we'll add a cast shadow underneath the sphere. So to review random lines, the lines will cross over each other. And like with cross-hatching, the greater the frequency of lines,
There's a whole range of mark making techniques that you can experiment with. There's just a few on the screen now, but there's so many more that you could introduce to your work to just develop it a little bit further. I want us to finish today's lesson with a drawing task that focuses solely on drawing with lines. And this is to show you how creative you can be with a basic bit of equipment such as a pen and simple looking techniques. These images on the screen now are perfect examples of how artists can use lines within their drawings to create depth and shadow, which in turn creates a dramatic final piece. During our final drawing task, I want us to focus on organic shapes and lines, similar to those on the screen now. We need to pull in all the techniques we've practiced so far to get this final result. We need to be patient, so don't rush this. The more time you take on it, the better it's going to look. So take your time and really control every movement you make with the pen. A few things to keep in mind when you are drawing is the pressure you apply when you put the pen to the paper. I really need you to control that line weight. Use bolder, thicker lines for the more shadowed areas. Also consider your hand positioning. We want you to move your hand easily and smoothly, again creating these organic shapes and lines. I started my drawing off by first outlining a circle. Now this is a slightly different process to the images I showed you on the last slide, but it's one I want us to keep for our drawing task. This is just because it's easy to get carried away while you're doing a full A4 piece of paper. Doing a small circle is really going to get us to consider every line we use. I want us to fill in every space of this circle. So I want the circle to be about the size of a sellotape wrapper, but you can use whatever to outline your circle, that's not important. Then we're going to first put in our first organic shaped line. So you can create this with a slight curve to it. The important thing is how you then mirror that line. I need you to repeatedly draw that line while considering the weight of the line by applying different pressures, but also the distance in between the lines, as these are going to help create shape and form of the circle. So have a bit of fun experimenting with the different effects that this will give you. Then you move on to another organically shaped line with nice curves, and just go about that in the same process until the entire circle is filled up. I finished off my drawing by adding in another colour. But if you haven't got another coloured pen, that's fine. You can just go back over in the same colour and go back through the lines and fill in between the lines with the same pen. When you create more lines, it gives you more of a shadowed effect. So have a little experiment with your own on that one. I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this final drawing task. Remember everything I've said in the previous slides. I want you to concentrate and really control that pen the best you can. The more time you spend on this, the better outcome you are going to have. So even if you only finish half your circle, it's better you finish half the circle really well rather than rushing it and getting squiggly lines. So I've left some written instructions on the screen. You can leave the video playing. I'm going to start a 10-minute timer, and you got a little bit of music to listen to while you work. So your 10 minutes starts now.
Hey guys, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the structure of today's lesson and that you've got a lot out of working with a pen. You should be really comfortable and familiar with how the pen works now. So you can use this slide as a sort of checklist for the work you need to hand in. First off, you've got 2 drawing tasks which are focused on pen control. And in these tasks, you should have applied pressure and pen movements to control how the ink gets onto the paper. Secondly, we had 4 drawing tasks for mark making, and during these tasks you should have created texture and shading with different mark making techniques. And finally, our last drawing task, you should have created a linear pattern, which should have included 1 circle which was filled with curved lines with varied spaces and weights of the lines. So you can use this as a success criteria to help make sure you've got all the work you need for today's lesson.